Hello, welcome to my channel. I'm Tiffany, a retired librarian turned homeschool mom. And in this video, we're going to long-awaited me ranting and raving about this. So, obviously, this is a library copy. I don't want to own this. I really don't. This is A Little Princess. This came out in 1995. Now, I have already reviewed the book, which I enjoy. And yes, I'm going to be slightly comparing this disaster, not in the film, just in the adaptation part. This is actually a halfway decent film. But it's a crappy adaptation. So I already covered the book. You can check that out. That's already come out. I also covered, that will come out around the same time if you're watching this, on the exact same date, is the Shirley Temple version, The Little Princess, which is interesting in and of itself. I'll say this, at least they stay in London in that one. But that one's just weird because Shirley Temple, and I was thinking about this the other day, she still has that very childish voice and she's 11 in that film. That came out in 1939. This came out in 1995. So let's talk about this story in and of itself. So, yes, this is kind of based off the book. There's so many things wrong with this. But so in this story, Sarah Crewe's father's name is Richard. She grew up in India. Her mother and her baby sister died. And her father is volunteering for World War I. And so he's taking her to New York to go to the school where her mother went. So she's taken away. And he's paid for her to have the nicest room and basically shower her in wealth. Because he is very, very wealthy. Why he goes off to fight as a captain, basically as an officer in World War I. So she goes about, she interacts with another girl, Lavinia, which again, I don't remember from the books. It is actually brought up in the previous Shirley Temple film as an antagonist here, besides Miss Minchin, and her, who's running the school, and her sister, who has no spine, which is true of the book. And Minchin is, in fact, very, very cruel. And Becky, who's the scullery maid, and Sarah kind of befriends everybody except for Lavinia and I think one of her friends, because again, Sarah is more wealthy. So time passes, her father is pronounced dead for some reason, and again, they do this in the other film. The British government confiscates all his wealth. This makes no sense. It makes no sense at all. Why the heck would the British government confiscate the wealth of someone who has an heir? I.e. her. It's not like she was known not to exist or anything. They knew he would have put in paperwork that he had a kid. Not to mention she's a British citizen, considering he's British. So, and he was living in British India at the time. I mean, so yeah, it makes no sense. But she loses everything. Minchin is, who hates her just because of her wealth. And how kind she is to everybody. And that's kind of actually true to the book. She's turned into a servant. She's starved. She's frozen. She's headed up in the attic. She's very much abused. She is required to help teach the younger kids because she speaks fluent French. Which again, if her mother went to a boarding school in the United States, it doesn't entirely explain why on earth Sarah would speak fluent French. In the book, her mother is French. So she speaks French, as would her father, because he married a woman who's French. So it would not be that unusual for her to be fluent in French. Not to mention she was upper-class British. Again, that might be why she's fluent in French, but again, it doesn't also explain why the heck her father took her to New York, let alone why her mother, who supposedly was French, at least in the book, was going to a boarding school in New York. Makes no sense. Moving on. She's pretty much enslaved to the point and starved, and yet she still remains kind. The next door neighbor is an older gentleman that has an Indian servant, which makes no sense in New York. So that makes no sense. You'd find a lot of British servants in Britain because they owned, for the better lack of a word, it was part of the British Empire, India. So, at that time, it makes no sense for them to have in New York. But the Indian gentleman sees her, she befriends them, he realizes she's freezing and kind of decorates her bedroom with basically opulence. At one point in time, Mention had stolen her locket, which is something her father gave her. Her father gave her a doll, Emily, and a locket with her mother's picture in it. And Mention had taken it, and the girls and the students, other students, went and got it back for her because they love her. And she's like a big sister to them and a friend. And she tells stories to them. And she hasn't changed, even though she's no longer wealthy. She continues to be a nice person, which again is kind of that does fit the character in the book. But Mention finds out, thinking they stole everything that's now in their attic room. She calls the police. Sarah tries to escape to the next door. Now, what's been going on next door is her father's been brought there over mistaken identity, thinking they thought he was this neighbor's son. His eyesight wasn't gone, but he had bandages over his eyes. He had amnesia. So, and I think the guy realizes this isn't his son, but he's going to look after him anyway. So, and Sarah gets across. She nearly falls. There's a whole thing where the police are outside their doors. They're arresting Becky, who, again, is the servant girl who's African-American. And she is going across a board, and it falls, and she nearly falls, and she climbs in. And they come downstairs and into the neighbor's house, and they're looking for her, and she's hiding. She goes into a room, and she finds her father. And she tries to get him to recognize her, and he doesn't, and the police drag her out, and then somehow he snaps before they put her in the buggy to take her away. And it's raining, and it's dark, and she runs to her father, and they let go of Becky, and for some reason she runs to him too. And Mention, of course, now Mention sees him and knows who he is. So it's not, she sees him and she realizes he's alive, and she doesn't care because she wants to punish Sarah because she hates her so much. And she's jealous of her. And she knows that if her father regains everything, Sarah will be ranks above her. And she hates that. So, but again, the father reveals himself. Mention loses her job. The school is given to the neighbor for some reason. And that's kind of the end of the story. It makes no sense. The ending makes no sense. I mean, again, my biggest pet peeve in both this and the other book is, one, Dad's alive, and two, why the heck are they confiscating his money? So if you're not familiar with the book, what actually happens in the book is her father's name is Ralph Crew. He is Captain Crew. He is not military at the time. He may have been military in the past, but now it's more of an honorary title. He's in India because he's a wealthy man, and it's owned by the British Empire. He's choosing to be there. And he takes Sarah to London, as is common at that time, to go to boarding school. That's what they did. The parents, the British aristocrats living in India, had their children educated in boarding schools in England. That's just kind of what they did, and that's what he was doing. She was, I think, 7. And what ends up happening is, one, he gets into a financial deal with a friend of his by name of Mr. Carrisford, and invest in diamond mines, and they think they lose everything, and her father dies. He very much dies of shock, thinking he's impoverished, but the diamond mines are actually filled with diamonds. But he's dead. Carrisford doesn't realize what the heck happened, because he went into fever. Because again, he thought he not only lost all his own money, but his best friends as well. By the time he comes out of it, they realize they're filthy rich, and he can't find Sarah because he thinks she's in France. Now, Sarah, again, just like in this, she's 10 years old. She loses everything, but this is because her father thinks he lost everything. And Carrisford doesn't know where she is to figure this out. So he oddly enough moves next door. And he has an Indian servant. And the Indian servant sees Sarah and they make her comfortable because Carrisford is very, very weak. He had brain fever is what they call it. He may have had a stroke. Really, as you might when you thought you lost everything, not only of your own, but your best friends. And so it was a way for humoring Sarah, and in a way Becky, who is white in the book, not black. It doesn't entirely make sense why. It makes sense in the United States why she would be African American. It wouldn't make sense in London. So, but it was a way to amuse Mr. Carrisford in his illness and as he's desperately trying to find Sarah. And then she comes over with a monkey at the end of the book, and they figure out who the heck she is. 2 years had passed. So she's 10 when Dad dies. She's 12 when they find her. So, and that's how basically Mention in the film, Mention loses everything and ends up being a chimney sweep, which is something else that makes no sense. Chimney sweeps were, how would she be a chimney sweep? She was an adult woman. In the book, she doesn't lose her school. She wouldn't. There's no reason for it. She owns it. Her and her sister. Now, her sister has a fit and yells at her because once they realize Carrisford's come and Sarah has all her money back and isn't going to come back to the school because Mention was cruel to her, pretty much they think they're screwed. Now, it's not definite that why they're... Kendra! Sorry, I had a cat in my lap and scratching. Ball back up having a cat in my lap. Yeah, bat claws are not fun on cats. Back to what I was saying. There's no reason for her to lose the school. Now, her sister thinks they might because Carrisford might spread the story of what happened to Sarah, and they would lose all their patrons. And basically, yeah, they would lose their business. So, and she kind of blames herself because she had no spine, and that they should have been nicer to Sarah. But, again, Mention hated her because she was kind and sweet no matter what, and she acted like a little princess, whether she was in rags or not. And Mention also hated because Sarah was very smart. So, yeah, Mention could not stand her, and her sister have a big fight. What happens with Becky, as opposed to the films, and both of them, for some reason, I'm trying to think if there is even a Becky in, I think there is in the other film. But he doesn't, her father, one dead, Carrisford wouldn't adopt her. Becky becomes a servant to Sarah. Now, in our minds, modern mind, this doesn't sound very good. In the mind of, say, the author, this was a great position for Becky. Because, again, she was not going to be rise to a noble class. She wasn't going to get to the aristocratic class. But what she will end up being as she gets older is Sarah's lady's maid, which, if you go through hierarchies of servants in aristocratic households, that's pretty much that's pretty top-y-top, because she has complete access to the mistress, which is what Sarah would eventually become as she grew up. But yeah, she's essentially in line to being a very well-paid and very highly regarded member of the household. So for someone who is of the servant class, this is pretty much, the best outcome for Becky. And yes, Mention hates this in the book, because at the very end of the book, which they always kick out of the film, the entire point of the book is socialism. At the very end of the book, Sarah goes and interacts with a baker woman that she had once bought. She found like a sixpence in the street and bought some rolls. And she gave them to a little girl who was poorer and more starving than her. And the bun woman actually saw this. But she goes to the bun woman to pay her to feed the poor children. That is the end of the book. That is how the book actually ends. And it does turn out that the bun woman had taken in this girl that Sarah had fed. And the young girl, I think his name is Anne. In fact, that's the last chapter in the book. Please ignore Kendra. Sorry, cats. to basically have Anne, she'd taken Anne in, and Anne works in the bakery now, and Sarah suggests, it's like, if I pay you, will you have Anne give buns out and basically feed the poor children, because she remembers what it was like to be poor and cold. So that's the actual end of the book. The actual end of the film, again, Becky is adopted by Sarah's father. Sarah's father is alive, and they go off to live happily ever after. For some reason, Mention is now a chimney sweep, which again doesn't even make sense because Mention is not small enough to be a chimney sweep. Most chimney sweeps were small children. Child labor. Lots and lots of child labor in industrial America and industrial Europe and, the industrial world. And they're climbing up chimneys. Mention couldn't do that. So, again, it also makes no sense. Why the heck would she lose her business? Because Sarah was found? It makes no sense. Again, it also makes no sense that Sarah's father lost all his money. Except for Chris in the book, because he's a bad investment situation that turned out not to be so bad an investment. So, that is this. This is one of the reasons that this film kind of drives me nuts. Because there's so many plot holes that do not make any sense. Why is it changing them? Now, overall, it's a decent film. I mean, I'm not criticizing the film. It's a bad adaptation. It's a really bad adaptation. And again, there's these weird little plot holes, like why the heck would her father lose all his money that they cannot explain, and why the heck Mention ends up becoming a swimming sweep. Not to mention, Kendra! Cats knocking over books. Even in the 19 teens, Becky would not be adopted by her father. She may, again, similar to the original book, she may have been brought in as a close servant to Sarah. But, again, social class was still a thing. Not to mention, they were going to go back either to India or England, which is where her father was, because that's what he was doing. Otherwise, why the heck was he in Britain? There were no American aristocrats that were actually living in India. It wouldn't make any sense. So, why the heck they would be living in British India? So, yeah, there's just too many plot holes that make no sense. As a family film, it worked. It's entertaining. There's plenty of good characterization. The acting is fantastic. The directing is good as well. But there are just too many plot holes for me to fully be able to immerse myself in the story. And I've always been that way because A Little Princess was one of the first classics that I ever read, and was one of the first books that I actually, probably an abridged version, as a dyslexic who didn't really read until I was like 8 or 9, really was able to read. So this book is near and dear to my heart, and this film just makes no sense out of it. That's the end of this. I'm going to cover the mini-series that came out, I think, in the 80s. I'll double check here on... yeah, it's not showing me. But, which I have not seen before, and it's supposed to be far more accurate to the book. So that came out, I think, in the 60s, maybe the 70s, I could be wrong. But I'm going to cover that as well. So, and I will put the picture of that up in the screen. Yes, I'll probably just cover it all in one go. I have no idea how many episodes there are. We get to that. So, if you like what you see, be sure to like and subscribe. Besides covering that mini-series, I am going to do a 4th video, all coming out the same day, comparing the 3. So, I'll do a short video, or either that, or I'll combine my final video with basically comparing the 3. I may not be able to protect myself on that. We'll see. But, again, if you like what you see, like and subscribe. I have The Little Princess here. I'm covering the Princess Diaries series. I covered A Wrinkle in Time this year, as well as the god-awful film. Yeah, that was a disaster. But Disney. And yes, I'm covering the Princess Diaries films as well. Great films, bad adaptations. The second film, has nothing to do with the books, as well as a variety of other different books that fit with various events going on in different months. I think I have Black History stuff maybe going on in February. I have changed it around. There's only so much I can cover with Black History, or various different cultural histories, at least that I can find, particularly film-wise. I'm covering a few ballets, just to fit on with the princess theme throughout the next couple of months. And then I'm covering series-wise this year, 2023. I'm filming this in October of 2022. Is big series. Besides the Princess Diaries, I'm covering two more Pierce series, the Lioness Rampant or the Song of the Lioness Quartet, as well as the Immortals Quartet. I have previously covered the Circle of Magic and the Circle Opens, as well as the Will of the Empress. So those were some of earlier videos that I've covered. I'm covering the Guardians of Ga'Hoole. I'm going back to Meg Cabot later in the year, as well as Catherine Lasky, who's the author of the Guardians of Ga'Hoole, which is owls, and along with a bunch of other stuff. So be sure to, again, like and subscribe, check out the channel. I have a whole bunch of stuff you can watch in the meantime, and look forward to more. Thank you.